Some moments don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with warning or with ceremony. They simply happen, a collision of two lives in the exact wrong place at the exact right time. She would not know, standing in that hotel lobby with desperation written quietly across her face, that the stranger she was about to ask the impossible of was already watching her. Had been watching her for exactly 43 seconds. And that by the time she turned to him, something in the universe had already shifted. The way tectonic plates shift beneath still water, silently, irreversibly, long before the surface ever trembles. If this story already has you, you already know what to do. Please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's begin. The Grand Meridian Hotel in Milan was the kind of place that swallowed people whole. Marble floors that reflected chandeliers like still water, guests who moved as though the world owed them silence. Ariana Greco did not belong here. Not tonight. Not like this. She stood near the entrance of the private dining hall, her black dress immaculate, her composure almost convincing. Almost. Her hands were pressed flat against her small clutch, and her eyes were scanning the room with the quiet urgency of someone calculating distance between herself and a fire she couldn't yet name. Marco Ferretti was inside. Her ex. Her mistake. Her mother's chosen favorite. And he had already seen her. She needed a wall. She needed armor. She needed, in the next 30 seconds, a husband. She turned. And she found him. He was standing near the far edge of the lobby, slightly apart from the cluster of suited men around him, as though proximity itself was something he permitted only selectively. Tall. Italian. The kind of jaw that looked carved with intention. Dark eyes that were already on her. Not with curiosity, not with the blatant hunger she'd grown exhausted of deflecting, but with something quieter. More dangerous. She crossed the distance before her better judgment could stop her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice low. "I know this is insane. I know you don't know me. But I need you to pretend to be my husband for the next 40 minutes. A beat of silence. He studied her the way a man studies something he finds unexpectedly interesting. "And if I don't?" His voice was low, accented. Unhurried. "Then I walk into that room alone and spend the rest of the night convincing my family I'm fine while my ex-fiancé watches me pretend." She held his gaze. "I'd rather lie with a stranger than bleed in public." Something shifted in his expression, barely perceptible, but she caught it. "Your name," he said. "Ariana." He extended his hand with the kind of calm that suggested he'd agreed before she'd finished speaking. "Raphael," he said simply. She shook it. His hand was warm. His grip deliberate. Neither of them let go immediately. They walked in together. His hand found the small of her back the moment they crossed the threshold. Not asking, not hesitating. And the touch was so certain, so quietly possessive, that Ariana almost stopped walking. She didn't. He stayed close. Not performing closeness, being it. When her mother approached with bright, sharp eyes and Marco hovering 2 steps behind, Raphael didn't tense. He smiled. The kind of smile men with real power deploy sparingly, and only when they want someone to understand exactly who they're speaking to. "Raphael Santini," he said, extending his hand to her mother. "Ariana's husband." The words landed in the room like stones into still water. Marco's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Almost. Ariana felt it before she processed it. Relief so sharp it bordered on grief. Because it felt real. All of it. The hand still warm at her back. The way he angled his body between her and Marco without being asked. The way he looked at her, once when no one else was watching, with something that had no right to exist between strangers. The evening passed in elegant pretense. Raphael was flawless. Attentive without performance. Charming without effort. He remembered details she'd only mentioned once, in passing quietly under her breath, and wove them into conversation as though they'd shared years, not minutes. When Marco finally cornered her near the terrace doors, voice low and familiar and too close, Raphael appeared at her side before she had time to speak. He said nothing. He simply placed his hand over hers where it rested on the railing and looked at Marco with an expression so still, so complete, that the other man took 1 step back before he'd consciously decided to. "We should head back inside," Raphael said softly. To her. Only to her. She nodded. She let him lead her away. Outside later, in the cool dark of the hotel entrance while they waited for her car, she turned to him. "You're very good at this," she said. "At what?" "Making it feel real." He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look you don't manufacture. Who said it wasn't? Her car arrived. She got in. She told herself the warmth in her chest was just gratitude. Just relief. Just the afterburn of a high-tension evening finally unwinding. She would spend the next 3 days convincing herself of that. Monday morning. Greco and Associati's parent firm. Now under new international acquisition. Ariana walked through the glass doors of the executive floor with her portfolio under her arm and her composure firmly in place. She had survived worse than a new management changeover. The boardroom filled quickly. Senior staff, department heads, the acquisition team from the parent company. She took her seat without looking up, organizing her notes with the focused efficiency that had made her indispensable. The door at the far end of the room opened, and Don Rafael Santini walked in. The room stood. Ariana did not immediately, because her body had stopped processing instructions. He wore a charcoal suit, cut with Italian precision. His eyes swept the room with the practiced calm of a man who'd owned rooms like this his entire life. And then, with no warning, with no mercy, those eyes found her. He stopped moving for exactly 1 second. Then he continued to the head of the table, set down his briefcase, and addressed the room. "Good morning," he said. "For those who don't know me, I'm Rafael Santini. As of this week, I'm your new executive director." Ariana stared at the table. The man she'd asked to play her husband. The man who had stood at her back and made her feel, for 40 inexplicable minutes, like someone was actually there, was her boss. She waited for him after the meeting. She had to. She needed to establish ground rules. Clarity. Distance. Whatever professional boundary would make the next months survivable. He was still at the head of the table when the last person filed out, reviewing documents with the singular focus she now recognized as simply him, unhurried, immovable. "Mr. Santini," she said. He looked up. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something in its neighborhood. "Mrs. Santini," he replied. "That is not funny." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She held his gaze. "Friday night was a mistake. A moment of panic. I'd appreciate it if. I haven't said a word about Friday night. You just called me Mrs. Santini. I was correcting your formality." He set down his pen. "You came to me. I helped you. We are now colleagues. None of those things are a problem, Ariana, unless you make them one." The way he said her name, like he'd been saying it for years, like it belonged in his mouth. She left. She kept her spine straight the entire way to the door. Behind her, Rafael Santini watched her walk away with the expression of a man who has been patient his entire life and has, at last, found something worth the wait. 3 weeks passed. They were the most precisely agonizing 3 weeks of Ariana's professional life. He was correct. He never mentioned that night. Not once. Not in the glass-walled meetings. Not in the quiet exchange of project briefs. Not in the elevator they shared twice a week, where the silence pressed between them like something living. He was professional. He was thorough. He was exactly the kind of executive who made everyone around him raise their standards simply by existing in the same room. And he watched her. Not conspicuously. Never in the way that could be named or reported or even clearly articulated. But she felt it, the specific weight of attention that doesn't pretend to be something else. She told herself it was nothing. She was very good at lying to herself by now. The company's charity gala changed everything. The way events with open bars and soft lighting and insufficient distance always do. Ariana arrived alone. She wore deep red. Not strategically, simply because it was the dress that fit, the dress that was clean and pressed and ready. She did not think about him when she put it on. She thought about that exactly twice, which meant she thought about it. He was already there when she arrived. Standing with a cluster of investors near the far window, commanding the conversation without visible effort, the way powerful men do when they've stopped needing to perform power. He looked up when she entered. He always looked up when she entered. She went to the bar. She ordered sparkling water. And then a man appeared at her elbow, charming, younger, with easy confidence and a smile that knew exactly how well it landed. "You look like someone who got dragged here against her will," he said. "Perceptive," she replied. His name was Luca. He worked for a partnering firm. He was harmless, probably, and aggressively interested, definitely, and within 12 minutes he'd made her laugh twice and positioned himself between her and the rest of the room as though claiming territory. She didn't notice Raphael across the hall. Raphael noticed everything. He excused himself from the investors without completing his sentence. He moved through the room the way a current moves, no urgency visible on the surface, everything directed beneath it. He arrived at her side, placed his hand lightly at her elbow, and said, "There's someone from the board who's been asking for you." Luca blinked. Ariana turned. Raphael was looking at Luca with an expression so calm, so thoroughly unbothered, that it communicated exactly what he needed it to, without a syllable of aggression, without a single word that could be called inappropriate. Luca excused himself within 30 seconds. She turned to Raphael once he was gone. "There is no one from the board asking for me." "There wasn't," he agreed. "You can't do that." He was standing too close. "That is not your call to make." He looked at her then, fully, the way he rarely allowed himself to in professional settings, and the pretense of composure between them thinned to something translucent. "You're right," he said quietly. "I apologize." She wanted to be angry. She was something else entirely. The apology undid her more than the jealousy had. Because he meant it. That was the thing about Raphael Santini that she hadn't prepared for. He never said things he didn't mean. He never performed humility. When he was wrong, he said so, without theater, without qualification. She found him later on the terrace. She stood beside him without speaking for a long moment. "Why did you agree?" she asked finally. "That night in the hotel. A stranger asks you to play her husband. Most men would have laughed." He was quiet for a moment. The city spread below them, lights blurring soft in the fog. "You weren't looking for rescue," he said. "You were looking for a wall. There's a difference." He turned to look at her. "And you asked me like you already knew you deserved to be answered." Something cracked quietly, somewhere behind her sternum. "Raphael." "I know," he said gently. "I know what you're going to say. Then say it for me. That this is complicated. That I'm your employer. That you've been let down by men who had power over things you needed. And that makes trusting me feel like standing at the edge of something you've already fallen from before." The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Not a promise made loudly. A fact, delivered quietly, the way he delivered everything that mattered. She looked at him. The city hummed below. And she did not walk away. She should have known the peace wouldn't hold. 2 days later, she received a message from an unknown number. A photograph, her and Raphael, on the terrace at the gala. And 4 words, "Tell him to step back." Her hands were steady when she showed it to him. Her voice was not. He read the message once. His jaw set. She watched something move behind his eyes. Not fear, never fear, but the cold, precise anger of a man who keeps his violence entirely internal. "This isn't the first one," he said. It wasn't a question. She hesitated. "Ariana. There were 2 others. I thought they were random. I didn't want to. You didn't want to involve me. You're my employer. I am considerably more than that." He said it without heat, without drama. As though it had been true for so long it no longer required defending. He made a call. She understood, watching him, that Raphael Santini's world had edges she hadn't yet seen. That the calm she'd mistaken for simplicity was actually the surface of something very deep and very old and very capable of protecting the things it chose to protect. What came next moved fast, the way danger does once it stops pretending. Marco Ferretti. It came back to Marco. Always Marco, with his access to her family's social circles, his wounded pride, his inability to accept that she had moved on. But he hadn't acted alone. He'd reached out to a rival of Raphael's, a man named Corsetti, who had been circling Santini's business interests for 2 years, looking for leverage. She was the leverage. When Raphael came to her apartment that night, personally, without announcement, standing in her doorway with rain on his jacket and something fierce and unguarded in his expression, she understood the full weight of what she'd stepped into. "They're going to try to use you," he said. "To compromise a deal I've been building for 3 years. They need me distracted or discredited." He paused. "You are not collateral in my war. I need you to understand that." "Then what am I?" He stepped closer. The rain had darkened his hair. His eyes were entirely certain. "You are the reason I'm walking away from the deal entirely." She stared. "Raphael, that deal is worth. I know what it's worth. Quietly. Completely. I also know what you're worth. Those are not equivalent numbers." The world had a way, sometimes, of going very still. He reached up and touched her face. Once, with the back of his fingers, the way you touch something you've been afraid to want. And she closed her eyes, and the distance between them dissolved into something that had been inevitable since a hotel lobby and a stranger's steady hand. The rest of the night belonged to them, and to them alone. What was said, what was chosen, what was given and received in that quiet apartment with the rain against the window. It faded gently into warmth and privacy, the way the truest things do. Raphael did not simply walk away from the deal. He dismantled the threat entirely, with the precision and patience of a man who had spent his life building power specifically, so that, when the moment came, he could spend it on something real. Corsetti's position was exposed through channels that left no room for retaliation. Marco Ferretti was quietly, comprehensively removed from every professional and social circle that touched Arianna's life. She was never in danger again. Spring came the way it always does in Milan, without asking permission, filling the streets with light and the faint smell of espresso and flowers through open cafe doors. Arianna stood on the balcony of what was now their apartment, her coffee warm between her hands, the city glowing soft below. She heard him behind her before she felt him. The quiet certainty of his presence, which she had stopped fighting and started reaching for, somewhere between winter and now. His arms came around her from behind. His chin rested at her temple. "I have something to tell you," she said. She felt him go still. She turned in his arms. She looked up at him. This man who had chosen her over an empire's worth of strategy, who had stood at her back before she'd known his name, who loved her the way only people who've survived their own darkness learn to love. With their whole, deliberate, unretractable self. "You're going to need to update your emergency contacts," she said softly. He looked at her. His eyes moved across her face with the focused intensity she'd come to understand was simply him, loving her. "How long?" he asked. 8 weeks. He exhaled slowly. Then he pulled her close, not with urgency, but with the deep, grounded certainty of a man receiving the thing he didn't dare name, even in the privacy of his own wanting. "Marry me," he said into her hair. "Not for a lobby. Not for 40 minutes. Permanently." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind she'd been slowly recovering, one safe morning at a time. "I already told my mother you were my husband," she said. "I'm not walking that back now." He pulled back just enough to look at her. The corner of his mouth curved. "Good," he said simply. And the city turned gold around them, and the life they were building was imperfect and real and entirely, irrevocably chosen. And that, in the end, was the only kind of love that lasts.